I'm still debating whether to reattach these to the T-post or attach them to the block wall. I feel like if I were to attach them to the block wall, that would just be a lot more sturdy and a lot more stable than attaching them to the T-post. And it would also probably help me to just have them a lot more straight. So I might do that, but that means that within the next few days, I need to go to the store and pick up other supplies. So we'll see. We'll see. I haven't fully decided yet. Okay. I'm gonna turn off the sound for now, just because this gets really, really loud and I don't want to hurt your ears. And I'm gonna be wearing my earmuffs, so let's do it.
This is going to take me a while, so while I keep working, I'm going to tell you 3 tips to help you keep your garden alive in the summer heat. Tip number 1 is to add 50% white shade cloth to your vegetable garden. Now, the percentage you can play with depending on where you live. If you live somewhere where it's really hot, I live in the low desert of Arizona, and for my entire garden, I feel like 50% is a good medium. Whenever I've looked it up, there's always a different percentage recommended based on the plant. For example, tomatoes, they'll say something with a little bit of a higher percentage, and then you have things like peppers, and maybe that needs a little bit of a lower percentage. Or you have things like eggplant that might not need any shade cloth. There's just so many variation depending on the vegetable that you're growing. But because I'm not just growing one type of vegetable, I'm growing every single type of vegetable I possibly can in my small backyard. And on top of that, I'm also growing all kinds of different tropical and stone fruit trees alongside a ton of citrus. Every single tree is going to have different light requirements. And there are some that are going to be a lot more sun sensitive, like the mango and the avocado or the passion fruit or the dragon fruit. And then there's others that don't want too much sun protection because they thrive in the heat and they thrive in the full sun, like the olive tree or the mulberry or the fig. But adding 50% shade cloth, I think, keeps the majority, if not all of the plants happy, because it's still a huge improvement from how the weather and the climate in my backyard usually is during the summer heat. But there are different types of shade cloth, and there's different colors of shade cloth. There's the white shade cloth, there's black shade cloth, and there's a silver looking one. And I personally prefer the white shade cloth. Number 1, because it creates a softbox effect over my entire garden. Not only does it block out 50% of the light, but as the light comes through, it's so diffused and soft that you don't feel the intense heat the same way it feels whenever you're anywhere else in the garden or in the front yard that doesn't have that sun protection above it. I've also tried black shade cloth before, not from this specific brand, which is Be Cool Solutions, but from a different brand that I purchased on Amazon. And at the time, I think it was the most affordable black shade cloth. And it did block out light, but I feel like it blocked out too much light because I noticed that my plants would stretch for light. I noticed that if I direct sowed seeds, a lot of my seedlings would come out leggy. And maybe that's because my backyard faces north. And so already I'm getting less sun, but at the same time, it's still too much sun to where everything's burning. But if I put black shade cloth, my plants just weren't getting enough light. It made it way too dark underneath. And because of that, I noticed over time that my plants were stretching for light. They were getting leggy. They just didn't look quite as healthy. And then once I switched it over to white shade cloth, immediately it became so much brighter in the garden. And over the next few weeks, I noticed a huge difference. I noticed that any seeds I direct sowed, they popped up beautifully. No legginess. They weren't stretching. They were just so beautiful. And then everything else just performed so much better. My plants fruited a lot more. They looked a lot healthier. And everything just thrived a lot more. I will never ever switch from white shade cloth over to black shade cloth. Even though the company that I buy the white shade cloth from also makes a black version, I will continue to stick to white shade cloth because I feel like that just works the best for all of my fruiting plants. Maybe if I wasn't growing fruiting plants and I was only growing ornamentals, the black shade cloth might make more sense, but Overall, I just love how the white shade cloth performs in the garden. Not only does it make my backyard nice and bright, which makes the plants happy, but personally, it makes my job easier too, because it makes my whole backyard perfect for filming these diary entries, because it diffuses the light so much that I don't have all of these harsh shadows or harsh light hitting me directly. I have a huge softbox pretty much right over me. Adding shade cloth to a garden also makes it noticeably cooler during hot days. And I love that because it helps to prevent the plants from wilting. And I know that a lot of the times it's normal to see plants wilting during the hottest parts of the day. But my issue with gardening in the low desert is that my plants don't really stop wilting ever. They always look kind of droopy because it's so hot all day long. They don't get a break. The day doesn't seem to cool down at all, and you can see that through their leaves. You can see that through their stems. They don't produce fruit anymore. They're just in survival mode. And adding the white shade cloth has helped me to stop that from happening. Now I'm able to go outside at any point in the day, even during the hottest parts of the day. And if the plant has the white shade cloth over it, it is not wilting at all. It is still nice, green, and perky, which I love. Shade cloth also makes it so that I can water less, because there's less water evaporating throughout the day. And this is a huge plus because I grow trees in pots and they tend to dry out faster than trees planted in the ground because they don't have insulation from the soil to protect them from the elements. In the pots, the heat is hitting the sides all day long. The top of the soil is drying out. The roots don't have anywhere else to turn to, The soil is probably never going to get and stay as cool as it gets and stays when a tree is planted in the ground. Using less water, especially during some of the hottest months, is a huge perk because number one, I already live in the desert, so I don't want to use too much water. Number two, I have so many plants in my garden that I don't want to have to water them for so long because that electricity bill gets pretty high during the summertime for the AC, and I don't want to add a water bill on top of that. So having the shade cloth makes it so that I don't have to increase my water drastically compared to the winter days or the cooler days because the water isn't evaporating quite as fast. My plants aren't getting droopy. They're not needing additional water quite as often because the shade cloth just helps to keep things cooler underneath it. On top of that, it also helps to extend my growing season. For example, the tomatoes that would normally stop producing because the days get too hot would start producing again. So I would get more flushes of tomatoes during months where my tomato plants usually fizzle out because the sun just scorches them to death. And that was mind-boggling to me, honestly, when I saw my tomatoes producing again when it's over 100 degrees outside, because for some reason the microclimate in serendipity is just working amazing. That felt incredible for me, honestly. Another example is herbs like cilantro or even brassicas. Things like my broccoli, my cabbages, the cauliflower that would normally start bolting really fast because they like cooler days, they would continue producing a little while longer before fizzling out or before the pest pressure got to them. So that's something that was a huge perk for me because I struggle with that so much. I love a lot of the cool season vegetables, but growing them in my garden can be very difficult because it just is so warm all year round that the vegetables don't seem to do very well, or even if they grow, sometimes they're a little bit bitter. So having the shade cloth overhead helped to delay a lot of that. It didn't stop it completely because regardless, it's going to become too hot at some point for some of these plants, but the shade cloth is at least going to make those temperature fluctuations a little bit more tolerable and less intense so that the plants can continue sticking around and producing for longer. Another huge surprising perk was that even my heat-loving plants appreciated the shade cloth and produced more abundantly and for longer. For example, the Armenian cucumber vines that usually thrived regardless of how hot it got began to scorch. And then once I added the shade cloth up, they started growing again. And I could literally see it in the vines. The older leaves and the bottom portion of the vines were a lot woodier. They were really dry. The the leaves were super crunchy and brown, but then towards the top you saw all these new shoots coming out, and it was awesome because I got so many more harvests from heat-loving plants that would have fizzled out because of how intense the heat got. Because honestly, whenever people mention heat-loving plants, the amount of heat that they're referring to doesn't apply to the low desert of Arizona. It doesn't apply because the temperatures in the low desert are extreme. Even heat-loving plants might stay alive, but they won't really produce much until the weather cools down just slightly and you're hovering in the hundreds. That's when I start to see a lot more production, and then the cooler it gets, the more they produce. But during the summertime, we're seeing week after week after week of days over like 110, 115. It's ridiculous, and it is unbearable for any living thing to be outside. And initially, I thought if I set up the shade cloth, my heat-loving plants might not love it so much. They might not grow so well, because that's what I was kind of used to with the black shade cloth. But I noticed that plants like my Roselle hibiscus or Flor de Jamaica or sorrel started flowering a lot sooner in the areas that had the shade cloth. And I think that's just because with blocking out a portion of that light, I don't know if that triggered the day length sensitivity with them, because they're the type of plant that doesn't start producing until the days get shorter in the fall. But once I set up the shade cloth, I noticed that happening a lot faster for the Roselle hibiscus plants that were underneath the shade cloth. And I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but I have a feeling that it did. And because of that, they started producing and flowering a lot sooner. So I was able to harvest basket after basket of Flor de Jamaica for much longer before it got too cold and the plants stopped producing for me. So that was really fun. And then vines like my melons even loved the white shade cloth. I noticed so much fruit set on vines that I usually would get like a fraction of the amount of fruit that I got. And I think a big part of that was just the fact that the shade cloth was up. The microclimate was a lot better. The plants were staying hydrated a lot more because of the shade cloth. It just creates this positive domino effect in the garden where everything just works together a lot better. And my garden can push through even on those really hot summer days. Adding shade cloth to a garden honestly creates a phenomenal microclimate for tropical fruiting plants like mango trees, avocado trees, soursop, passion fruit, dragon fruit, guava trees, and I've grown all of these inside of pots. And I know that if I didn't have the shade cloth up, growing these plants in serendipity would be a lot more difficult for me because I'm not able to plant any tree in ground. So I don't have big canopy or shade trees to help give these tropicals a little bit of sun protection. But the shade cloth solves that for me. So that's why I highly recommend you set up shade cloth as my number one tip for keeping your garden alive during the summer heat. Tip number 2 is to add wood mulch to your in-ground vegetable garden, raised garden beds, potted fruit trees, potted vegetables, and any in-ground trees. Basically, if you're able to see soil, that's a big no-no. Just cover it with mulch, okay? Protect that soil at all costs. And the reason I say that is because mulch is going to be another one of your best friends during the really hot summer days. Adding mulch helps because it insulates the soil so it stays a little cooler underneath the mulch, and it also helps to retain moisture in the soil so that you're not using quite so much water because the soil isn't drying out quite as fast. And keeping the soil moist enough is important because there is a massive teeny tiny world of organisms and beneficial bacteria and fungi and all kinds of bugs and worms and life living in the soil. And if the soil dries out, then they can't thrive. And if they can't thrive, then the soil stops being a living thing. And it's taken me several years of adding organic matter, red wriggler worms, mulch, soil amendments, and organic fertilizer to bring serendipity to life. And without mulch, one day in the Arizona summer heat is all it takes to destroy it. Now, my favorite type of mulch is shredded wood mulch. In the past, I've tried straw as well, which is a lot more cost effective, but it doesn't work for my garden anymore. When I first started using straw mulch, I was so excited because I could buy a bale of it for like, I don't know, maybe like $10 to $15. And then I used my leaf shredder to shred the straw and turn it into this really fine mulch that I was able to cover all of my garden beds and almost all of my potted fruit trees. And I loved that because it saved me a lot of money, especially compared to buying bags of wood mulch. I just don't get the same bang for my buck. But the reason that I stopped using it is because during the summer, serendipity fills with birds, especially because it gets so hot outside that I can't be out there constantly. The birds totally take advantage of that, and they make a mess of every single bed. I feel like usually they're searching for worms, they're searching for seeds of the plants that have already bolted and started flowering. Once those flowers dry up, the birds are all over them. And they're constantly scratching in the garden beds and over all of my pots, and the straw would just fly everywhere. So I had to stop using it and went back to wood mulch because that was a lot heavier, and the birds are still able to make a huge mess of it, but at least it minimizes the amount of mess that they make. Because whenever they would scratch all of the straw mulch out of the garden beds, I was so scared that the rodents that also make their way to serendipity, along with every other living creature trying to find shelter from the Arizona sun, makes its way into serendipity, and straw all over the floor makes perfect nesting material for rodents or other little critters that I don't want in my garden. So because of that, I personally like to use the natural shredded cedar mulch that I find at the big box store, even though it is a lot more expensive. In the past, I've tried the natural shredded cedar mulch, and I've also tried the dyed wood mulch that you usually find on sale during the spring or summer. I personally don't purchase those bags anymore though, because I have read and heard other gardeners talking about how the wood used for that wood mulch is what you should be cautious about, because a lot of the times it's made from materials that you wouldn't necessarily want to be growing food in. So just to be on the safe side, I'd rather just stick to the natural mulch. With that said, there is a free resource for wood chips, and that is Chip Drop. I've personally never used it, but I've heard a lot of people recommend it and a lot of other gardeners use it. And basically it's this free service where you sign up to receive wood chips from arborists in your area or any trees that are cut down. The wood chips from that would get delivered to you. But the catch is that you have to take the entire load. So if you sign up for it, you might get the perfect amount, or you might get a mountain of wood chips, and you are responsible for now taking care of those wood chips or removing them or doing whatever it is that you need to do. But in my case, this didn't work out because of the HOA. I wouldn't be able to just have a huge pile of wood chips in the front yard. And on top of that, my yard isn't that big at all, so I wouldn't have anywhere to put the wood chips if they dropped off a huge load. And I just didn't want to deal with that, especially during the summertime. Instead, I resort to just buying the bagged wood chips. And tip number 3 is to invest in drip irrigation and a garden timer. Drip irrigation is a lifesaver, I promise you, because it can be customized to every individual garden. And setting it up on a timer ensures that the garden gets watered no matter what. And this was such a delightful upgrade for serendipity because watering by hand grew to be an impossible task once I had hundreds of containers to look after. In the beginning, I watered by hand with a hose and a nozzle attachment. This was doable, but very inconvenient, and my watering was very erratic because I did it whenever I found a spare moment. Next, I upgraded to a watering wand attachment, which was better than the handheld nozzle because I could maneuver around the plants better and water them at their base, and it was more comfortable to use too. However, my watering was still erratic, and sometimes I'd completely forget or I'd be too exhausted, as mothers of gremlins usually are, especially newborn gremlins. At this point, I started looking into drip irrigation, but I was too intimidated by it, so I decided to build a watering setup out of PVC pipes. I would hook up the hose to the pipes, turn on the water, and set a timer on my phone for about 3 to 5 minutes. After the timer ended, I'd unhook the hose and move it to the next garden bed before repeating the routine. And this drastically decreased the amount of time it took me to water a single garden bed. However, I learned that I am not responsible enough or organized enough to water on a schedule by hand, especially during the spring, summer, fall, and sometimes even early winter because it was still too hot in the low desert. So I finally gave in and began learning how to set up drip irrigation. For me, this turned out to be a several month-long project full of trial and error because sometimes I'd buy the wrong parts and I tried different types of emitters like sprinkler emitters, fan emitters, single drip emitters, and finally I settled on 1/4 inch drip irrigation tubing with emitters every 6 inches. I like to buy mine from Drip Depot online, and the link to that online store should be in the description of this video. If you decide to use my link to purchase the drip irrigation supplies from them, I earn a small commission which helps out Serendipity, but that is my go-to place because usually I would buy all of my irrigation supplies at the big box store, but I found out that at Drip Depot it was a lot more cost effective, and then the shipping was also really fast. So I liked ordering from them because everything came in at once, and that made the whole process a lot easier for me because I could do my research on what I needed and then order it from inside my home versus having to drive to the store and then stand in the aisle and stare at everything, trying to figure out what I was staring at so that I could pick up the right pieces. And it just made it so much easier. Plus, I'm not sure, I'd have to double check, but I think they might also have a YouTube channel for that company. And if they do, most likely they should have tutorials on there on how to set up drip irrigation. For me, it was just a lot of Googling and looking up diagrams to figure out what different parts were and trying to find those parts. But purchasing them from Drip Depot, especially the 1/4 inch drip irrigation tubing, has been my favorite. And honestly, I haven't even seen irrigation like that at my big box stores. Usually they have the drip emitters every 12 inches, and Drip Depot has it for every 12 inches and every 6 inches. Plus, they have different color options. I think they have black and brown, and I feel like there's just a lot more variety because they solely focus on irrigation supplies. But what happens after you have all the drip irrigation set up and on a timer? When do you water and how long do you water? These are the questions that no gardener ever gives a direct answer to. And that's probably because the amount of water doesn't just depend on what type of plant you're growing. It depends on what type of soil you have, whether you're growing the plant in a pot, a grow bag, raised garden bed, or in the ground. Is there mulch or no mulch? Do you get any supplemental rain? How hot are the days and how windy? Because that can affect how fast the soil dries out. If you're growing in a pot, how big is the pot? There are probably many other factors to consider, which is why there is no one answer for how long to water your garden. But with that said, I'm going to tell you how long I water mine so you can at least get an idea. So my drip irrigation is set up on a timer with 4 different watering zones. The first zone is not scheduled to water anything. It's just connected to my garden hose. This way I can manually set a timer for say 15 to 20 minutes where water will be available from the hose. Then once the timer is up, the water shuts off on its own so I don't ever have to worry about accidentally leaving it on. The second zone waters the 6 raised garden beds in the heart of Serendipity. I usually program this zone to water 4 times a day for about 10 minutes in the cooler months, up to 15 minutes in the summertime. The third zone waters the small pots, which range from 3-gallon pots to 5-gallon pots. This zone is programmed to water 4 times a day for about 3 minutes in the cooler months and 6 minutes in the summer months. The fourth and final zone waters all my extra large pots, which range from 15 gallons to 25 gallons and houses many fruit trees. This zone is programmed to water 4 times a day for about 10 minutes in the cooler months and about 20 minutes in the summertime. The watering times are not set in stone and change based on how the garden looks. For example, if I see my plants drooping and wilting constantly without perking back up like they usually do, I increase the water by 1 to 2 minutes. if I notice a lot of water seeping out the bottom of the pots or a funky, rotten egg smell coming from my containers, I decrease the water by 1 to 2 minutes per week until I find the sweet spot. For the pods, I do want some water to drain out of the bottom so that it can help wash excess salt out of the soil. But I don't necessarily want this happening every single day because that means the nutrients in the soil are getting washed out too. Watering the garden 4 times a day also helps to give everything slow sips of water so the plants can withstand the heat a little bit better without inundating them with water once a day, most of which just drains out the bottom. And those are the 3 main tips that I would give you to help keep your garden alive during the summer months if you live somewhere where it gets really hot.
All right, guys, I'm almost done. The sun's about to go down in the next few minutes. I did the first few poles with this drill bit, but before I even picked this one up at Harbor Freight, I had actually picked up, I'll put that in there right now. I'd actually picked up the 5/16 drill bit from DeWalt at Lowe's, and this costs more than this entire set of drill bits. And after I found this one, I thought about maybe returning this one because I was like, what are the chances I'm going to use it now that I have the other ones? Oh my gosh, the quality is day and night. I was able to knock out the last 4-5 holes with this one in seconds, whereas with the other one, I kept trying and it felt like it was more dull and I just had to keep applying more pressure. And honestly, it was kind of a hassle using this one. The one from DeWalt just worked so much better. So I wish I had used that from the beginning because this would have been a much quicker process if I'd done that. Now I could just start attaching everything together. Because the sun is almost gone, I'm just gonna tighten these up and then I'm gonna set them up underneath the trellises, ready for paint. I don't know if I'm gonna get to that tomorrow because we have a really busy day tomorrow, but throughout the week I'll come out here and I'll work on it so that I can have it set up within the next like 10 days or so. But at least the most difficult part is done, which was drilling these holes. And I mean, if I can drill through metal conduit, I can do it. I can set up the other screws in the cinder block, and that shouldn't be too, I shouldn't be a scaredy cat about it. I've done it before. It's just that, I don't know why. Sometimes some things intimidate me more than others. Okay, that one looks pretty good. Okay, there's one. I hope I bought enough of the little attachments, of the little eyelet screws. Let me see. Do I just have, oh, I think I did. Pretty sure I did. I'm so tired. But you know what? I also feel super, super accomplished because I could have just done the painting. I could have just painted the 3 new ones that I recently bought and left these alone and figured, you know, I'd replace them once they started falling apart, once the other attachments that I used started falling apart. But seeing how loose some of them were, it would have been such a hassle to do it when it gets really hot. So at least from here on out, the other projects that I have in mind are going to be a lot easier. It's just going to be planting things, setting up string lights, so it's going to be a lot more fun stuff. Not that this isn't fun, but sometimes it can get a little tiring. My husband's inside making dinner, so I'm gonna be so ready to eat and relax with my family for the rest of the night. And I know that after doing all this, I'm gonna sleep like a baby. because I'm already so tired. Just one more after this one and then I'm done. Goodness. Last one. Just good because the sun's almost all the way down. I gotta hurry up. I'm just going to hold these up by putting them through the holes right here, just like this, so that they're standing upright. That way when it comes time to paint them, they're already standing up and it'll make it way easier for me, and I'll just paint them another day. So this is what all the poles look like. I'm gonna paint them all black, and now that I have them all set up, I kind of already know that I'm not gonna have enough paint, so most likely tomorrow I'll stop by either Lowe's, Home Depot, somewhere, and I'm gonna pick up some paint. I know that there's some that is supposed to be more like rust proof, so I might just look for some of that one. But the poles are ready for painting now, and they have the hardware attached, so the hard part is done. It's just gonna be painting them and then setting them up on the walls, and then attaching the shade cloth should be a lot simpler. The last thing I need to do now is just pick up all of my mess, but I'm finally done. The garden's gonna look a little bit messy the next few days. Oh, let me uncover that. But it shouldn't be too bad. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. It's time to head inside now. I'll see you next time. This is what I come indoors to. My husband making us some fresh tortillas.
I'm gonna use my fingers on
Yeah. I know you can do it. But look how...
Bro.
I left my tomato here as well. I don't have all the lights on, but even with just these, it looks very lovely. Although I am a little bit apprehensive about walking through these pathways late at night, because there are, oh, okay, the tomato looks fully intact. That makes me feel so relieved. But look how pretty it looks. I have huge plans for setting up more string lights throughout the garden and really throughout Serendipity, so that during the summertime I can come out and film at night if I need to, because during the summer it's really hard to garden during the day, and then that way I can still create content, as long as it's not too hot, of course. But oh my gosh, I've been doing so much research. Anyways, I have my harvest, and that's it. Good night.